Today, I spoke with artist, poet, and co-founder of the Stuckist Movement, Charles Thompson. We talked about that difficult space, building collaborative, supportive communities, and yet having to challenge, having to push back when you think things are wrong, having to make a stand, having to say what needs to be said, and how that can be difficult, challenging, and also how it can be a bit of a privilege. So if you're interested in truth, if you're interested in seeking truth, how seeking knowledge and willing to take a stand can benefit your life, then listen to Charles Thompson. He has some real wise words, and we go in detail all the way from early literature to the modern art movement to the Kabbalah. So we cover it all. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Joe Class. Okay, we are live. Okay, so thank you for turning up to this Thursday night conversation on the Magnificent Man Project group. Today's conversation is going to be with Charles Thompson. He is well-known co-founder of the Stuckist art movement, poet and artist. Great to have you here, Charles. Thanks for coming. For those of you who are watching at home, Magnificent Man Project, the cornerstones of this are really around contribution, connection, challenge, and celebration. It's a place where we try and build better things, and that was one of the reasons that I invited Charles on. Was when we were having a very brief conversation after a Joe Machine event that we had. And some of that will become more apparent as we go. What I'd like to do now is, so that you will do a better job of it than me, Charles. So I'd just like you to introduce yourself to the members of this group and to the people that are watching at home. And they may not have the sort of art world acumen that some of the other people who know you do. So I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, when you were speaking to start with, you said co-founder. I thought you actually said confounder.
Both would work, wouldn't it?
So yeah, I'm a bit of a confounder. I mean, at the end of the day, like everybody else, I'm a human being, but you can't just say that. You have to kind of then define yourself in terms of some activity. So really what I am is a poet and artist. But what I'm probably best known for, to most people, if they know me at all, is a bit of an art activist and co-founder of the Stuckist art movement along with Billy Childish, and we've done quite a lot of protests, for example outside the Turner Prize, got an awful lot of press publicity for that sort of thing. And the art movement Stuckism, it was named after an insult from Tracy Emin to Billy, and it was to promote figurative art, painting, which people could understand, and we didn't think very much of the notion of putting a shark in a tank in formaldehyde. We didn't think that was very interesting or a great achievement, because it's the sort of thing you have done in natural history museums anyway, and just calling it art, that's what we're opposed to. So I don't know if people watching have much idea about postmodernism. Probably best not to have much idea about it, but postmodernism we see as being the enemy, because it devalues, it's cynical, it's kind of sophisticated, but its values are superficial, celebrity and commerce. So we founded Remodernism to go back to those early pioneers, those visionaries of modernism, people like Van Gogh, for example, who wanted to contribute something and had beliefs and values. And that's what I think we need to establish now in this century. Last century, the 20th century, was one of innovation, newness, progress. Everything has to be changed. Well, if you keep on developing and progressing more and more insecticides, you end up polluting rivers and so on. So instead of Now what we want is organic vegetables, which always used to be called vegetables. So 20th century was one of newness, 21st century is one of conservation. I mean, that's a global thing, and it applies as much to art as anything else, or it should do. Anyway, I don't know if I've talked too much already.
No, I mean, that's the perfect introduction, really, because, what really interested me after we'd done the Joe Machine event and we were talking afterwards, the conversation got on to kind of, violence and suffering and those sort of things. And I'm paraphrasing slightly, but you said, you called the attention to that, and you said, look how addictive this is. And, and kind of look how easily we slip into being fascinated with what's sort of negative and what's violent in the world. And, what we need to do is sort of create things that are better and help each other build things up, which obviously caught my attention. But why I thought what particularly caught my attention about that is because you said that, and yet you kind of have this kind of reputation in the art world for being sort of very confrontational in a way. And then me and you had a conversation afterwards where you said something which I thought was really fundamentally important, actually, and something that I really try and get over in a lot of the stuff I do around men's work, especially around men kind of finding their strength in a healthy way, is this kind of need to, yes, always be supporting, always be building where you can in terms of what you believe is right, but yet being willing to stand up against what you believe is wrong, and kind of seeking this notion of truth, like not being willing to be swept away just because it's easier, standing up and seeking truth. So that's why I've invited you on. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because it seems to be a difficult thing to straddle, but it seems to be something that you do straddle.
Well, you've raised a huge number of subjects in one little bit of speech there. You ended up with truth, and that for me is a fundamental belief, a fundamental value, truth in all aspects. If you use that as your yardstick in life, you'll make a lot of progress, and that can be quite hard because it involves facing the truth about oneself, which is not necessarily the things one would like to think of oneself as being. We have a self-image, but there is the dark side of the moon, there is the shadow side of us, and in order to progress, it's really important to take that on board and accept it as part of oneself. In fact, I would say the more I've progressed spiritually, if I can use that word,
please do,
the more I've accepted my human frailties, weaknesses, needs, and the more comfortable I've been with that. And I realized, first of all, I thought, years ago, I thought, if you're spiritual, you must be really good and perfect. And now I think, well, the more spiritual, the more imperfect you're going to be. But you set it in a bigger context. Coming back to your other point, which is about negativity. I studied in a Kabbalah group run by Warren Kenton, who died not that long ago. And one of the meetings, I think people were talking about possibly evil, and you could kind of feel the room was starting to get a little bit darker. And he stopped it and he said, look, this is addictive, it's very something you can enter into. I'm paraphrasing here, like a whirlpool, sucks you in. And I felt that was what was happening with this Zoom meeting the other day. They were talking about violence. It was going on and on and on and on. Never stopped, I thought, look, hang on. It is addictive. Negativity is addictive. I remember I broke up in a relationship. This was many years ago, probably about 20 years ago. I was thinking all the usual negative things and emotions you think about someone. And I wasn't feeling happy feeling that, but that's what I felt. And I thought, well, I'll try something as an experiment. And I often try things as an experiment to see what will happen, things I wouldn't normally do. So I thought, okay, I've never done this before. I will write down a list of all the positive qualities and attributes of this person. and there'd probably be about 2 or 3. Well, I managed to cover a couple of pages. and I felt so much better at the end of it, because I'd restored a balance to myself. And I think that is a fundamental quality. And you'll see that if you look in Buddhism, you've got the middle path. If you look in Kabbalah, you've got the central column. You look at, the Tao, the yin and yang, you've got the Tao, the fusion of those. It's a fundamental concept. So when we're talking about the subject you mentioned, like dealing with something negative and, wanting to be positive, I think the key to it is balance and judgment. And there's that serenity prayer, which I don't know perfectly, but it's basically along the lines of, let me change the things I can, let me put up with the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think that's fundamental. It's this sense of balance and judgment in situations, what is proportionate, what is appropriate. Sometimes it's best to do nothing. Quite often, actually, it's best to do nothing. And the Western mind is particularly geared to doing something, to controlling all the time. And I've seen a number of times people in a real turmoil because they can't make a decision which they need to make. And when I talk to them, actually, you don't need to make it for the next 6 months because nothing's going to happen in that time. Making a decision now is not going to change it. And very often, if we just wait, the decision makes itself. So again, there's balance between action and passivity, between restraint and force.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because Jung, I read a lot of Jung, and I describe myself as a Jungian basically. And he often talks about kind of, you can only sit in the tension between the two options. When there's a decision, there's two options, and you can only really sit in the side of it until the middle way becomes apparent. And the middle way kind of becomes apparent when one side is willing to grow. Until there's kind of willing to grow, if you're just going to get stuck in, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And it's not really about going there or there. It's saying, well, how can I expand to let kind of one of those in? How can I grow to let one of those in? There was something you said that interests me, because I've been thinking a lot about where we are kind of culturally, especially in the West. And when you talked about kind of Van Gogh and the guys like that, what came to me was a sort of idea that there seemed in that to be, especially in the art of that time, much more of a wanting to connect with spirit. Much more wanting to connect with an idea of other. And now it seems to me in the art world that, and what Stuckism seems to be against is it kind of is caught up in its own cleverness. It seems to be about wanting to be about kind of the mind, like intellect rather than soul in a way. And I think actually Damien Hirst really summed that up when he said, I'm not an artist, I'm a designer of expensive designer goods. And I kind of thought that, well, you're being clever and you've hit the nail on the head. That is kind of where it is. And so is that a kind of it seems to me it might be a reflection of where we are as a culture, that we're much more in mind, in intellect now than in spirit.
Well, you picked on the art world. I don't think that's probably the best thing to look at. The thing is, it's a very big thing in terms of public presence, media presence. It's a very small thing in terms of interest of the population. It makes news stories, but most people have nothing to do with it, don't get anything from it. It's really, an exclusive club for rich people and artists that want, celebrity and commercial success and fame above all else. And Damien Hirst has said that, as you pointed out. That's not to. I mean, there's a lot of artists that aren't like that. The majority of artists are probably not like that at all. But they're the unseen ones. They're the marginalised ones. And I would say that the artists in Stuckism fall into that latter category. And what I wanted to do was give them more of a presence. I think they deserved a platform which they weren't going to get if they weren't going to sell out. And amazingly enough, I mean, they haven't. I mean, these are still artists that are very dedicated to their craft and want to do something deeper and something that, you know, connects with more spiritual understanding, by which I mean an understanding and a view of the world that is beyond merely individual benefit. You know, you do something for a bigger benefit, for a wider input into the world. It's not just for yourself. And I'm not saying that has to be like someone doing a crusade or something. This can happen just within a family. It can happen doing someone's garden. And it's an attitude. And Jung, certainly, yeah, I mean, Jung has taught me a lot of things about the psyche. And I think that's really where it starts, because if you're prepared to look at your own psyche, your own mind and your own emotions, you will become a different person to someone who is just looking outside for all their sustenance, all their benefit and all their value, whether it's commercial or success or constantly being in the media or whatever. And I think that's one of the big challenges now for us, is to deal with ourselves. And obviously there's a growth in therapy, there's a growth in problems, there's a psychological problems, but there's a growth in understanding psychological problems. I mean, PTSD, which, you know, a century ago wouldn't have come on the radar, and now it's seen as something key. You know, we realize that humans aren't super people. They can't go through wars and accidents and crises and just walk away unscathed. It leaves a problem which needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in addressing psychological problems, mainly because I've had them, not like mental health issues in terms of madness, but certainly in terms of emotional trauma, mainly through relationships, strong. And through those things, it's forced me to look, to explore, to go into meditation and therapy and things like that to find an answer. And I have found answers for myself, which I've shared with others as well.
Okay.
Which I can share with you as well.
Well, I'm always looking for a few more answers.
Okay. The thing is, the biggest issue in anybody's life is their problems. You know, it undermines everything. And that problem starts inside. It is inside, essentially. Okay, you can have things going on outside as well, but mainly in our lives, we don't most of the time. You know, most of us are not starving and homeless. Most of society is not like that. And people that are, that's a different kind of help they might need. So, you know, if you have a comfortable life and you're not happy, you know, you've got a problem, you're disturbed, you're worried, you kind of have you're plagued by things at times that you don't know where they come from. You know, why am I feeling like this? I shouldn't be feeling like this. So it's because there's a whole load of stuff in us, and obviously anybody that looks into psychology at all, like with Jung, etc., will understand what that is, where that comes from. And then you've got the next step of, well, how do I deal with it? And I've tried various methods. I've done a lot of work with art, poetry, self-analysis, free writing, all that kind of stuff. And eventually I ended up, well, there's two particular things that I would recommend that have helped me hugely, and also with friends I've kind of introduced it to. One is called the Inner Guide Meditation, and there's a book by a guy called Steinbrecher, Steinbrecher, the Inner Guide Meditation by Steinbrecher. You can get it on Amazon for about 10 quid or something. It explains it all in there. You're working essentially with what Jung called visualization, guided imagination, whatever, with the figure of a guide inside you. And you're going to certain problems. It's like an interface between your conscious and your unconscious mind, but a safe way of doing it. And the book explains it. There's stuff in the book you don't need to bother with about astrology and tarot unless you want to. That's not essential. If you're interested in it, fair enough, but don't let that put you off. So that's something I've used extensively, and at times quite remarkably and amazingly, the results. The other thing is the book by a guy called Roger Woolger, Woolger. It's called other lives, other selves. And he started as a Jungian therapist. And then he found that when he was doing visualizations, that things started coming up in people's minds that seemed like historic lives that they'd had in the past. And he's worked with those and found that's actually a very efficient way a very effective way of dealing with the problems that came up. What he actually says about this in the book is, well, I'm not going to say it's one thing or another. It could be a past life, a reincarnation you've had. It could be genetic inheritance. It could be merely symbolism. And actually it doesn't matter because it works. You know, whether you call, if you're hungry, whether you call a plate of food an encyclopedia or a motor car, if you're hungry and you eat it, you will still satisfy your hunger. So that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in things that work. I'm a pragmatist.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things there. One of them I'd like us to come on to now is really your poetry. And I'm very grateful that you said you'd be willing to come on and read us a couple of your poems. So that would be really good. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about that and then move on to truth, which is where we started, and I think would be a nice way. What I'd like to do is just take this time before we start that, just to thank the people that are watching, and to remind you that if you're watching this live, you can put some questions in the comments if you like, and I'll be leaving some room at the end for to deal with those questions as they come up. So please, if anything's come up that you're interested in, please do put them in the comments and we will come to them at the end. Okay, Charles, so back with you. And yeah, I'd love to hear a couple of your poems, please. And I'm sure the people watching will.
Well, the first one's called Three Men in the Street. And the central character here is somebody you know. I won't go into it any further. You'll probably guess. Three Men in the Street. I've changed the name a bit. The first man bumped into Jim on a dark night and dragged him into an alley where he started punching him. Jim gave the man a left hook to his jaw and the man fell on the ground, curled up like a fetus. Jim carried on walking and the man hobbled away in the opposite direction. The second man was arguing and swearing with his wife at the end of Jim's drive. Jim asked them courteously to stop because they were disturbing his children. The man ran at Jim, swinging his fist to punch him. Jim nutted the man in the face and the man fell on the ground with blood streaming from his nose. "Why did you do that?" he said. "Because you were about to punch me," said Jim. "No hard feelings," said the man. "Come round and meet my family." Jim went round to the family gathering where the man sat in the midst of his relatives, wife and children, in a blood-soaked shirt, which nobody seemed to take any notice of. Perhaps it is not an unusual occurrence. The third man was sitting on a wall, sobbing quietly to himself. "Is there anything wrong, mate?" said Jim, although it was quite obvious there definitely was something wrong. "I've got nothing," he wept. "My kidney's on the blink and my girlfriend's left me." "It's not true you've got nothing," said Jim. "You've got yourself. I've been through all this shit. It's going to pass, I guarantee." The man stopped crying and smiled. Jim said to me, "I'm facing parts of myself I don't want to see. It's a struggle inside that's jumped out into the street. It's all about my father and my childhood. I'm trying hard with my own son to bring him up differently to the way I was brought up, so he won't have to face the problems like these ones that I keep encountering in life." "You're doing well," I said to him. So that's kind of a violent episode. Now, here's somebody else dealing with a problem of potential violence, and here it's purely psychological, the response and the way of dealing with it. So this is called Sarah's Sushi with Football Hooligans. We travelled from Liverpool for a pleasant day shopping and viewing paintings in the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester. Afterwards, we had just started on a quiet sushi upstairs in Yo Sushi in Piccadilly Station when there was a sudden cacophony below. The station concourse filled with hundreds of football supporters heaving like flies, screaming like babies. We want blood. We want Liverpool blood. Liverpudlians are going to die. A group of them burst into the restaurant, yelling and striking their fists in the air. One of them pushed his face into mine and leered, "Are you Liverpudlian?" No one spoils my sushi, I thought, and peered at him with mock upper-class bewilderment, disassociating myself from my own city, as if I'd never heard of it before, and putting on my best upper-class accent, a blend of Sloane Ranger and the Queen. "I'm terribly sorry. Liverpool, we are from London, don't you know?" My friend David couldn't even look at me and turned away, half terrified, half wanting to burst out laughing, before he managed a feeble, "Oh, yeah." The bloke scowled. "Yeah, I thought so, wanky snobs," and shuffled off to join his mates, scouring the restaurant in vain for appropriate Scouse victims, before falling over themselves down the escalator in their quest, as they put it with almost religious zeal, for Liverpool scum. We wanky snobs finished our sushi and waited a precautionary hour before taking the train back home to Lime Street in London.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I mean, what I really like about poetry is also what I like about, you know, I don't know all of the, obviously there's a lot of Stuckists now, so I don't know all of them, but the ones that have kind of come through to my attention anyway, that I like, what I kind of like about a lot of them is they do seem to have this blend of like the real and sometimes brutal, and the reality of humanity, but always there seems to be the kind of the spirit and this idea of something higher, very hand in hand, very kind of next to each other. I know that we both like, you know, Joe Machine's work a lot, and I think he's a classic example of that, really, and that really came through in both of those poems that you read there. And I find that really interesting in terms of the sort of conversation that we're having here around this idea of, you know, kind of wanting the best, wanting to give something to humanity in a way, wanting to give something, and the responsibility that comes with that of sometimes having to be uncomfortable and sometimes having to be challenging and just having to say what needs to be said. And we had that kind of conversation when we were in preparation for this, and you talked about kind of some people have the ability to kind of cut through and tell the truth in a way, like kind of expose the emperor's new clothes, as it were. And often you've found yourself in that position, you know, I mean, with the, you know, the Stuckist movement kind of calls itself the anti-art movement, doesn't it? And and I think often, and what I think was interesting about that is, I know from, because I'm into that and I've watched it for a long time, I know that the Stuckism was really about trying to say, listen, art is something true and valid and valuable and from the heart, and there should be craft in it, and there should be heart in it, and there should be spirit in it, and not this sterile, you know, sharks in tanks, what you're talking about. But really, in a way, in the media, it got almost presented like the kind of, what do they call it, like the politics of envy, in a way. It was almost like, oh, look at these outsider artists, kind of jealous of Saatchi and all his success, and that didn't seem to be true, and it must have been difficult to kind of hold that line in the face of that, I imagine.
No, it was wonderful.
You.
It was marvelous, because the big problem, if you're up against the art establishment, is not them attacking you. That is when you're winning. It's them ignoring you and freezing you out. And don't just take my word for it. Jonathan Jones, the Guardian art critic, said exactly that. And he said it's a disgusting attitude from his point of view, because it stifles free speech, it stifles communication, it stifles democracy, it stifles all the values which the West is meant to be built on. But that is what happens when commercial values predominate. So, yeah, we were frequently misrepresented, misunderstood, because it was a war, you know, and you don't give your enemies any benefit, even if they have got good things. You know, you have to put them down to get rid of them, because we're very threatening, obviously. Because if there's all these people that are investing, you know, billions of pounds, literally billions of pounds in something, and you'd say actually it's worthless, that's a little bit provocative, I think.
Yeah.
Which is what we were doing. So what I'm afraid there's two things with Stuckism. One is the art. The other is the promotion of the art. And they're different things. So with Brit art, they're the same thing. You know, you have to do a gimmicky bit of artwork to get the promotion. Well, you need gimmicks to do PR. And I separated that out. And most of the artists are not involved with the PR, with the promotion. They don't feel comfortable with it at all. In fact, I don't even feel comfortable with it. It's something I realized I had to do. Every time we stood outside the Tate Gallery and protested against the Turner Prize, which we did for 20 years, every year I didn't want to do it. And I tried to sort of put it off. Finally, I've now decided I'm not going to, because it's done its job. But, you know, I had to do things. I mean, Rachel White-Reed had a artwork on top of the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square. It was actually a cast of the plinth made in resin, turned upside down on top of the plinth. Kind of clever stuff, pretty meaningless, but clever. And there was a launch with all these dignitaries like Sir Nicholas Sirota of the Tate Gallery, Melvyn Bragg, and various artists all standing around, and someone gave a speech, and there was a podium, a little podium with a microphone and a barrier for the public to stand behind, and all the dignitaries at the side. Well, the launch happened, and the person got off the podium, and the launch had finished. And I saw an opportunity. And I thought, oh, dear, I've got to do this. I do not want to do this. I just want to go home and have a cup of tea, but I've got to do this. So I jumped over the crowd barrier, scraping my shin slightly, and stood on the podium and started addressing the crowd through the speaker system about the evils of the Turner Prize in conceptual art. And there are all these dignitaries standing there listening to me, because they're not going to do anything, are they? They've just stuck there. I'm not even sure what I'm saying. Apart from you brought up this issue of having, you know, negativity thrust towards us. Yeah, that, but it's not too bad. I mean, it's because we had a lot of support as well, of course. So people, I mean, the newspapers are divided into two halves artistically. You've got the front of it where the journalist writes things, the reporters, and you've got the back of it where the art critics write things. The art critics all hated us, and the journalists all loved us. So, but yeah, in the art world, we have a very negative, you know, there's a lot of people with very negative views towards Stuckism. But, you know, I mean, the thing is, we're not going to get put in a gulag, you know, not going to get chucked in a freezing cell with rats or anything. It's not, it's this very, very comfortable, liberal society to live in compared with some countries. And I don't think I would do this if I was in real danger, to be honest, you know.
In China or somewhere, yeah.
I don't think so. No, I'd be looking to emigrate as soon as possible.
So
I'm a sort of cowardly brave person.
So truth. We started off at the beginning. You talked about the importance of truth. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about that, the importance of truth, and why it's important to stand up for truth. And it may seem like an obvious question, but I don't see it happening quite a lot. It doesn't seem to be happening.
You say it's obvious, but I mean, postmodernism, no, there is no such thing as truth. Everything is relative. And C.S. Lewis, the Oxford professor, in his book, That Hideous Strength, gave a very interesting story about Oxford professors that would deny there was any such thing as morality. It's all relative. And yet, if they owed you 2p, they'd go to extraordinary lengths to pay it back. So there's a dissociation quite often in people between something that's in theory and something they feel intuitively, or they have with their feelings that they know is right, or they sense is proper and works. Yet their head is telling them something different. And that is the problem with conceptual art, but that's a different story. So to say truth, well, first of all, a lot of people don't even think there is, well, theoretically, such a thing. I think there is such a thing. There is very much such a thing. You know, it's true that we are talking to each other at the moment through Zoom. I mean, that's true. You might say, well, that's trivial. You know, we're talking about bigger things. Well, if once you've established the principle, there is such a thing as truth. You know,
there is truth. There is truth.
I'm tapping something in front of me, which is a table, you know, and I'm tapping it, and that's true. Now, you could say, actually, but on another level, that's just atoms and so on. Well, yeah, that's another aspect of the truth, but it doesn't deny that on another level there's a table, on one another level there's atoms. Now, if you start applying that to human behavior, then it becomes rather more important than just saying this is a table. If you apply it to yourself. But there is one word of caution I would utter. The truth is like Apollo, the sun god, and it blinds people. It can do. I mean, T.S. Eliot said mankind cannot bear very much reality. I mean, reality and truth are actually synonyms for each other. So be careful with truth, because you don't necessarily go around saying truth to everybody all the time. You have to use judgment again. And sometimes there's a different higher, spiritual truth is the higher truth, which trumps mundane truth. But then you have to be prepared to take the spiritual responsibility and repercussions if you're not just going to obey mundane truth. But for example, I mean, I've written a poem about this actually as well, but supposing you have an axeman with a child, and it says, and this axeman is wearing a red shirt, and the axeman says, what colour shirt am I wearing? If you tell me I'm wearing a red shirt, I'm going to kill the child. If you tell me I'm wearing a green shirt, I'm going to let him go. Would you tell the truth? Oh, the truth is you're wearing a red shirt, and then the child gets killed. Well, you don't. I don't think anybody would. You know, all these people say, I always tell the truth. Well, no. What, in those circumstances, you say, oh, yes, it's a wonderful green shirt.
Yeah.
And the child gets free. So the spiritual truth is that the child's life is important, and the mundane truth is subsidiary to that. So, you know, truth has a little bit more complexity, subtlety, and sophistication than merely the obvious. But also people say, once you start looking into it, you start discovering things if you use that as your yardstick. For example, supposing you're angry with somebody, you say, the truth is they've done something, they've done this, that's wrong, and I'm angry with them, right? That's only the starting point. Because then you have to say, well, what did they do that was it really a wrong thing they did? Even if they did do a wrong thing, is my response proportionate to that? Why should I be angry about it? Actually, it's disturbing my life. I don't want to be angry about it because that's affected me and I'm not happy now. I'm angry or I'm hateful or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you start looking a bit deeper and say, well, where is it coming from me? And then you start opening up things. And this is where it comes back to what I said earlier about looking at methods of going inside and changing oneself. And I mentioned the inner guide meditation and the past life work, as it's called. There's two things that I found very useful. But anything, you know, anything that works really is the thing to go for. I don't know if have I covered truth or have I missed something?
No, I mean, it's really, really interesting. It's really interesting because in the kind of, you know, in I do a lot of stuff within kind of realms of men's personal development, and that kind of truth and the responsibility of truth kind of comes up quite a lot, you know, because there is this idea of, well, firstly, there's the difference between I'm questioning truth and I'm actually trying to be right. You know, they're two very different things. You know, I can get caught up in being right. And where me being right becomes more, it can become more important than being kind, you know, for example. And I find a lot that people will use a phrase like, well, it's my truth, right, as often as a precursor to being quite unkind. And I find myself thinking quite a lot, that may well be your truth, but did you need to say it? You know, did it need to come out? It's not benefited anyone by doing that. And that's that thing I liked about the sort of title of The Truth Hurts Sometimes. It does seem like it's a sort of, you've got to get the internal side of that correct first, in a way, because otherwise that quest for just saying whatever you believe to be true as true can wound lots and lots of people.
Well, sometimes people do have to be wounded, although I'm not recommending that. But I think if you start saying my truth, you're actually really saying my lie. You're saying my position. Hang on, you know, if there is truth, it's an objective thing. It's not I don't possess it. You don't possess it. It's something that exists in itself, like the sun. You know, it's not my sun or your sun. It's a sun up there that shines on us all. And I would say the same thing about, you know, the truth. You can say something now.
Well, I was just looking because we've actually just had a question come through, and it may have been something that we've already covered, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because Tony asked, is there ever a time when truth is not the best policy?
I think that, yeah, I sort of alluded to that. I would say, yeah, I mean, truth is not necessarily the best policy if you can't deal with it. I mean, sometimes someone, you or I or somebody, might need to shield themselves from something because they're not ready for the consequences of it yet, and hopefully they'll work towards that. Also, as I did say earlier, there's a difference between knowing truth, understanding a truth, and communicating. Because again, then you get a bigger truth. You know, you might know something about somebody. For example, I heard the story the other day. Someone was standing next to another person. Now, this first person is quite psychic, and they saw this dark aura. They knew that second person was going to die. That's the truth. Well, in fact, apparently they did. The next day they died. But do you tell that person that? And they decided not to, because it wasn't going to do that person any good. That's what they felt. So I think what I find very useful is the Kabbalistic tree of life, which from the outside looks pretty arcane and esoteric. But I was fortunate, as I said, to study it with someone called Warren Kenton, who's made it very practical and everyday and modern. So you can actually apply it to your life. And one of the features of it is to demarcate different levels. Now, that's very, very useful. And the bottom level is your body. Your body has a truth, obviously, you know, your hunger and so on. But I think for most of us, the really interesting thing is the difference between the next level, which is called the ego, and the level after that, which is called the self. The ego is me, and the self is I. To, you know, give you a simple way of accessing those concepts. So me is what me wants all the time. But the I is a place of truth, integration, balance. The me just is completely self-centered. But the I is something which is capable of objectivity. So me just wants, you know, what's best for me all the time, which actually at the end of the day isn't. Whereas the higher level of self incorporates other people, you know, in a more objective way. So, and then beyond that, you've got something spiritual, which is a much bigger picture. But the point is, you have different levels, and there's a truth on a level. But the lower level of truth, it might be, you know, the truth is, I'm angry. Therefore, if I'm angry, I think I should punch you. But if you actually go deeper, you will start to process that in a different way, and you'll say, well, I'm angry, I feel like punching you, I'm not going to, because you know, I've got whatever reason, and also I'm not happy with this feeling of anger. I want to look at that in me, as I said earlier. So the question was, is the truth always appropriate? I think the truth is appropriate, but what you deal with it, how you deal with it, and what you do with it is a different matter. You know, you shouldn't go around just telling everybody the truth all the time, necessarily. I mean, I have some good friends where I can actually share, and they can share a truth. And sometimes you think, oh, did you really have to say that? And you think, well, maybe that's the best thing that someone said to me all week.
Yes.
Because it's really pointed me to something, and it was a bit uncomfortable because my ego was going, oh, I thought I was better than that.
Oh no,
and you say, look, thanks, you know, you've really, that was pretty, oh, that kind of hit home there. You touched something on me that I couldn't see. And in fact, I'm involved in a bit of an ongoing dialogue with somebody in my life, where there's a lot of aggravation going on. And my big thing is, they're certainly touching on something in me which I can't quite see yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big supporter of men's groups. I've been involved in them for nearly 20 years, and kind of through my job with the Mankind Project, I'm actively promoting them in the UK and Ireland. And one of the elements I really like about a men's group is exactly that challenge. It's that place of like, listen, I'm gonna say something to you which I see in you, or I see in your behavior, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And you know, being on the receiving end of that truth sometimes isn't easy. But I've always appreciated it afterwards, because I've known where it's coming from. It's not coming from attack. It's coming from a place of I think this is going to help you grow. I think this is going to support you. I don't think this matches the values of the man I see in you. But I'm seeing this behavior in you. And so I do think setting up those kind of, you know, friendships, or if you're going to do it like a men's group, however you set it up, having those places where you can kind of speak truthfully to each other in those ways about each other is really, really beneficial. We've had a couple.
I was just going to say, can I just jump in here? I think there's something that's important to say, is one shouldn't be puritanical about this. You know, it's not a question of, oh, I've got to do everything all the time with this truth. No, you don't, because, you know, some of the time you just coast along and you just accept, you know, the kind of half truths, things that go on in life. But there's certain things at certain points where, yes, you do have to look at that thing, but it doesn't mean you have to do it all the bloody time, you know.
Yes. So we've had 2 questions come in, and I think we'll finish there. We're at the end of our time, so we'll finish with these final 2 questions. One of them is from Steve, and he said, I'll paraphrase it, it's quite long. He said there was a couple of times in when you were talking that you said you didn't want to do it, like you didn't want to go and stand outside on the gates of the Tate Modern, and you didn't want to jump over the wall, pick up the mic. What made you do it?
A sense of purpose. I mean, again, it's a bigger purpose than me. You could say that is the spiritual level, but sometimes, well, this has become increasingly a feature of my life. You know, if you want, you know, there's a kind of more religious way of putting it, not my will, but thy will be done. You kind of have something more than just the ego, just the me bit. You know, you become a kind of an expression of something, a tool of something almost. I mean, that the purpose was of promoting the arts of the Stuckist movement. And then I saw a very good opportunity to do that. And that was like my job, if you like. And I think there's lots of things in life that lots of people don't want to do. I mean, probably a lot of people don't necessarily want to go into their job every day, but they've got a higher purpose, which is to provide for their family and themselves and keep their house going and the mortgage payments and so on. Obviously, I wasn't doing it for that reason. It was a slightly sort of a different purpose, but it's because there was a higher purpose, and I was subservient to it, and it kind of kicked me up the bum and said, "Here you go." And I thought, "Oh, really? Okay." I mean, it would have been a wasted opportunity. I'd have regretted it. I'd have thought I should have done that.
Yeah.
That was that I was thinking about the Trafalgar. If you have a purpose, I mean, yeah.
That's what I was going to ask. Purpose. I think purpose is key to it, isn't it? Having
yeah. I mean, and the purpose doesn't have to be something, magnificent and kind of public sort of manifestation. It can just be tidying up your room, doing the washing up. You've got a purpose. So again, there's something we haven't touched on much, but a little bit. It sort of is levels, and that's very important to distinguish different levels in life where truth operates. And when you muddle those levels up, you adulterate. And thou shalt not commit adultery. So to muddle up things that don't belong together properly is not helpful. Was there another question?
Yes, there was another question, and it was around kind of truth and how we could kind of sometimes hold back the truth, or sometimes we you don't not need to express the truth. Tom asked, is there ever a time when it's okay to lie?
Well, I mean, I gave an example of, somebody was a murderer with an axe going to kill a child, and if you lie to that murderer and tell him he's got a green shirt, then you'll let the child go. Yeah, I mean, the whole point is, are you really telling a lie at that point? Because there's different levels again, and the spiritual trumps the mundane.
Yeah.
And for example, you might be a detective who's investigating a crime, and you have to pass yourself off as something in order to get to the bottom of that, and that will maybe stop something happening. Maybe there's a murder plot and you infiltrate a gang and you pretend you're part of the gang. Well, you're lying all the time.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't condemn that person, because by doing that they've stopped a murder happening. I mean, that's an extreme example, but once you've set the principle, you understand, oh, hang on, there are different levels, and a higher level, for just using that word, a higher level is the important thing. But then again, if you do that, you've got to be prepared to accept the responsibility for it. You've got to know what you're doing.
And purpose plays.
And sometimes we lie because we don't want to hurt people's feelings, and that might be the best thing. And again, there's a higher truth is considering their feelings, a judgment call, and judgment goes along with truth. Truth isn't isolated, it's integrated with all the other aspects of being a human being, and judgment is a very, very important one. Yeah. Especially in love, because there's a kind of tradition in the West for Christianity of self-sacrifice. Well, that's not necessarily a very good thing to do. And one of the things where people feel they should sacrifice themselves is in love. Well, again, the Kabbalistic tree shows very clearly that love on one side of it needs to be balanced out with judgment on the other side. If you just love and give to somebody all the time, you end up disempowering them and taking power over them, because you're doing everything for them, and they're got no resources of their own left. So just loving to an extreme becomes an evil. Everything taken to an extreme actually turns back on itself, turns into its opposite.
And that idea of purpose plays a big part also, doesn't it? Even in that, because there's been lots of times in history where people have had to lie, have had to lie just to survive, often just to kind of protect the greater good, just to keep going, just because that's the purpose, is let's just get through this. We're going to have to lie and take different identities, do all sorts of things, I
mean, you're lying on one level and not on another.
Yeah.
If your child is starving and you go and steal some food for your child, and some policeman comes along and says, did you steal food? You say, no, you're lying. That's not bad, because your greater truth is looking after your child and looking after life. So, lying is actually a tool. I shouldn't say that, but it can be. It can be something that is used for the good. And that's the whole point, really. At the end of the day, if you're trying to achieve something that's worthwhile, something good, then you've got various tools to do that.
One of them might be lying.
One of them might be lying. So again, what I'm saying is don't be too puritanical about all this. And I can hear through that last question, there's obviously someone with a very strong conscience who's a bit troubled about telling a lie. Oh, look, if you tell a lie, it's not the end of the world, usually, unless you're in charge of a nuclear button. So don't worry about it. Get over it. It's not the end of everything. You move on and learn from it, or maybe correct it, or maybe realize it was the best thing to do.
Mm.
We're all human. I mean, some lies, they don't really matter very much, do they? Let's face it.
Yeah. Like, do I look nice in this?
No, I'm not going to sort of comment on your hat, It's not important.
I'm worried now.
You're going to say, what do you think of my hat?
My hat.
Sorry? And I'm going to say, and I think it looks bloody stupid. What I'm actually going to say is, I think it goes very well with your beard. It's a similar colour,
Okay, I think we're finding the natural conclusion to this once I start getting. So we have one last question, which was, where's the best place to kind of access your work if people want to go find out more?
Me personally. Well, if you go to Stuckism, stuckism.com, that's stuckism.com, as in stuckism, like cubism, stuckism.com, and then you'll see at the top there's links for paintings, and you click that and you'll see Charles Thompson popping up. Or just Google my name and Stuckism, or go to Wikipedia. But my work has changed a few years ago, so you have to look a little bit deeper, or just email me, if you want to.
Okay, so I'll stick all
just
those links in the comments.
Just email me through Stuckism.
Great. And
if you're really serious, I can.
If people go onto the Stuckism site and contact, it'll go to you.
Yeah, so if you email Stuckism at yahoo.co.uk, I can pick that up. That's no problem.
What about where can people find your poetry?
Well, the thing is, I didn't do poetry seriously for over 20 years, and I've just started it up again. So there are some older books that are floating around in second hand, but it's sort of going up in price now. And I'm planning to bring some out. You could probably find some few ones. If you're really interested, email me.
Great. All right. As I said, anyone watching, I'll put in the comments or anywhere where there's data attached to this. I'll make sure the links are on there. Okay, Charles, thank you very much for giving your time to this. I'm sure I definitely appreciate it, and I'm sure the other men watching this will appreciate it. Really interesting stuff. So thank you very much. And our path seems to cross every now and again, so I look forward to the next time it crosses. I'll see you soon, Charles.
Okay.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take care.